Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Warehouse, a Speaking Of show. I'm your host, Josh Johnson, and today I am joined by a very special guest, Rachel Elspeth Gross, who's a fashion historian and Forbes contributor. We're going to be talking about fashion today. It's the art that we all live our lives in. It decorates every little facet of existence, whether we choose it or it chooses us. And so I just couldn't think of anybody better to have this conversation with than you. Thank you for joining us today, Rachel.
You're very sweet, Josh, and thank you for inviting me. I mean, this is my favorite thing in the world to talk about my favorite thing in the world.
So let me ask you this, just to kick this thing off, what got you interested in fashion in the way that you are?
Oh, I knew from childhood that I was going to work in fashion. I have very distinct memories of on VH1, there used to be this show called Fashion TV, and it was like just runway shows, like late 80s, early 90s. And I would just draw and look at the pretty clothes. And I knew it. I knew that it was going to be what I did. My mother sews, so I don't even remember learning to sew. I'm teaching my daughter now to embroider. I mean, I don't know, it's just part of who I am. It always kind of has been.
So you open up another question, and it's the utilitarian value in fashion. Do you operate hands-on into fashion, or are you more critique and appreciation and expose based?
Well, I went through design school. I studied apparel design and fashion/costume history. And I can make pretty much anything. I mean, I went through a period where I was recreating all of these 19th century ball gowns, like including like the stays and support garments underneath them. And I love that work. I mean, it's very cathartic. It's kind of like, I don't know, exercise in a way for my brain. But writing and thinking about why clothing matters and how it fits in to our culture, for better or for worse, is intellectually stimulating in a way that I've found few things to be. And I love stories. I love storytelling. And I love seeing all the patterns that emerge. And when you start seeing people referencing each other or considering older work in their own, it kind of makes you feel like you're being winked at, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. Easter eggs to the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
So I've read you say that that fashion intertwines through culture, and it gives us, I'm paraphrasing now, I'm putting a little of my decorative language on it, but it kind of gives us a peek into our own heritage and our own history. What do you mean by that?
Oh, I think our clothing gives away like all of our secrets. And I think that can be conscious, and I think that that can be subconscious. But if you want to consider what a culture loves, what it fears, what it aspires to,
What it values?
yeah, that all really, like, quite literally comes out in the wash. I mean, from how we're making our clothing, how we're manufacturing it, how we're selling it, what we think of as stylish or beautiful or ugly. I mean, if you look hard enough and you pay attention to the cues, it kind of feels like we're walking around naked, if that makes sense.
It does. It makes perfect sense. I love that you juxtapose the words history and heritage, because so often people use those words interchangeably, and they're just not the same words. You know, history is more general, and heritage is more personal. Something it could be an heirloom, or it could be a birthright. You know, it could be a mandate, whatever it is.
Story.
Yeah, heritage is passed down, and so the fact that it is socially passed down and sometimes physically passed down is just so important. Which brings me to a really cool question. When we talk about passing clothes down, the class issues that fashion can highlight. You know, you have haute couture, which is high, and then you have working class fashion, and then you have thrifting fashion, and you have uniforms, which are literally working fashion. How does that play a part in fashion, that class issue, the divide or the marriage or whichever?
Oh, it's fascinating. It's
Yeah.
absolutely fascinating. Like, we still have this idea, perhaps more prevalently in the South, that we are not supposed to wear the color white before or after a certain date.
Yeah.
And that comes from the fancy upper class Gilded era ladies leaving New York to go to Nantucket and changing their whole wardrobes. And it became a thing to wear white in the summer because it was aspirational. And I mean, yes, it was cooler, wearing lighter colors when it's hot. But to think that pieces of that still to this day affect not only how we ourselves dress, but how we think about the people that we see in public, because we cannot help but form opinions. And whether or not someone is following an arbitrary rule, created by a very moneyed, class centuries ago, it's still there. I don't know. It feels like, I don't know, there's so many clues and cues. I think that you cannot separate issues of social status, economic status, and clothing. I mean, anybody that we look at, we cannot help but make some decisions, classify by who we, in our experience, think that they are based off of, our determination of, it's...
You see these little the keepsakes that you were referencing that are passed down in whatever way they're passed down. You see them all the time, whether it's through the colonial nature of how we live. Nations that have conquered other nations leave literally pieces of fabric behind, and so it's an identifier for so much, and class is just one of those things. I've also heard you speak politically about fashion. What space does that take up in your head? And I know that's a huge question.
No, but you know me, and you know that I have I very much hope that my work can encourage this industry to be a better, kinder industry. I would like other people to feel that way about their own work and their own industries. And I think it would be almost impossible for what people wear to not be a political... if you think about the different political sides having different political rallies dressed in hyper-specific ways, and for better, for worse, but it created a kind of material culture. And that's ultimately, I think, a lot of what the history of fashion is about, which is material culture, which is shared. That's something that we all, just by existing in this culture, have ownership over. And I don't think we necessarily treat it quite that egalitarian.
I was just going to say we share it, but it's also an identifier for our own tribalism and separation. And so it's so interesting that even the things that we all keep, we make sure that we divide so that we all know who to stay away from, who to go towards, who's kind. And these are just other judgment pieces. Is there any facet of fashion that is trying to tear down those boundaries?
So much of it. I can't tell you how many young designers that I talk to. People who are either, just starting their own companies or maybe coming out of school and they happen to be in a circumstance where they're financially able to make some choices that a lot of people couldn't. But even coming from a place of that much privilege, they're still incredibly conscious of how their clothing is being made, how it's being marketed, the fairness of the labor practices, sustainability, the quantity of production. I've had 22-year-old girls talk to me with their stars in their eyes about minimizing the tags because they know that tiny little piece of paper multiplied by 10,000 is a huge amount, so how can she figure a way around that? And I love it. I love seeing young people know that they're going to make it better. That makes me feel great.
Let me ask you a question that's going to get us both in trouble. Not
Please.
Really. Fashion is regional, right?
Yes.
And so when we talk on this show, we have a very local appeal. Are there any fashion trends, identifiers that you've seen locally in Tallahassee that would mascot us?
Well, I think there's probably two ways if you want to just be totally we would have there's the gentleman in the suit walking up to the state capitol, and then there's the student, right? And neither of those are inherently, good, bad, or anything. But I think that there's a lot of interesting stuff in our town that maybe wouldn't be here if we didn't have the student population. And just by the nature of being, a young person in the world for the first time by yourself. I mean, I love seeing kids wearing weird outfits and, they're trying on identities. They're trying to figure out who they are and how they feel about themselves and how to make that work in our world. And I don't know, there's a certain amount of bravery that it takes to try on a whole new identity.
Speaking of identity, it leads to the next part of fashion that I was going to talk about, which is the costume. I don't care how cool you are or how uncool you are, I don't think that anybody can escape the costume. We all put it on. We know how we want to look. We know how we want to present. And even if that is an apathy that says, I don't care, that is reflected in the fashion. Let's talk about the intersections of fashion and art, which is just one of my favorite conversations.
I mean, in the Venn diagram where fine art and clothing, apparel, or costume overlap, like that little sliver is where I would like to live my life. I think it's very interesting because both costume and apparel design they're commercial, right? Like it's this overlap of what can be exceptional craft and very well executed art with the need to sell in a market. And it's the dynamic, the balance, the lack of balance sometimes between those two things, I think is a very, very interesting place to consider. But there are ways of making clothing, of making fabrics, of any of the skills that doing any of that, that have been around for thousands and thousands of years. And we lose more and more of them every single year when, somebody's grandmother or grandfather dies and they were the last person to know how to make this particular kind of, lace out of kelp from this particular, Irish island. And that's a real example. I think that when we know that we are going to be challenged, like let's say we have to give a speech on stage, if you feel good about yourself, if you feel like you look the way you would like to present, I think like you just said, it's almost like armor. It gets rid of something to worry about and it kind of frees up a little bandwidth to make like an internet analogy there. And feeling like yourself, feeling comfortable like yourself.
Or who you want to be.
I mean, who you want to be or being seen as who you would like to be seen as. I mean, that's a huge deal. That's a really big deal. And I think it matters to all of us, regardless of what the personal definition might be.
I tell people all the time, I am a cross-pollination, fashion-wise, of Bleak Gilliam, who is a character from Mo Better Blues, an old Spike Lee movie that Denzel Washington plays, Fran Lebowitz and Kramer from Seinfeld. Those people kind of guide my fashion choices, and I know it deliberately. And so when I'm looking for something in the store, I say, is this something that Denzel would have worn in Mo Better Blues, or is this a coat that Fran Lebowitz would wear? It is something that stays with you. And I do use it. That was the perfect word. I've heard Cornel West say the exact same thing when people ask him why he always wears the suit. He says it's because it's an armor. I present in a way that I want to present, and it's just one less thing to worry about.
It is, and you'll hear like founders at startups, like, I can't think of his name, the Apple guy who only wore black turtles.
Steve Jobs.
And like you had said a minute ago, by opting out of participating, you're still participating. Like nobody's walking around literally naked all the time. And, even if you don't care, by not caring, you're making a statement, which is circular and, again, fascinating.
There's that monologue from Miranda Priestly in The Devil Wears Prada, where she says, you think that you're better than us because you've opted out, but fashion chose you. You didn't. And there's a whole industry dedicated to it. The righteous side of it and, probably some of the more problematic sides. But it exists. It absolutely exists. So let me ask you my favorite question.
Please.
And I'm going to ask it to you in two-prong. You've kind of already answered it. Is fashion art?
It can be. It absolutely can be. But every, T-shirt that comes out of a mass market, whatever, is not. I mean, not even every prom dress is a piece of art. But there's times and places, and I think the distinction matters. I think having something to aspire to or be inspired by matters. I've been working on this idea a lot this year that it's really hard to look down on anyone when you're looking up because you're impressed by somebody else. And I haven't fully fleshed that concept out, but it feels very important.
Sure.
And I think that's maybe a place where there can be an example of that. Ikea Ikeshowa, the Japanese designer who made the beautiful, beautiful costumes in the Bram Stoker's Dracula, like Francis Ford Coppola. Like, she made art. I mean, her work, it wasn't, there's no way it could be seen as just, a garment.
While I have you there, I just thought of a question that I would like to ask. Do you have a film that you think has the best costumes?
Oh my gosh, so many of them. I mean, that would be a great example.
I love the
of
Fifth Element.
The Fifth Element is wonderful too. And the art direction in that movie is so good. I mean, I really, really enjoyed the costuming in Shogun last year. I had the opportunity to speak with Carlos Rosario, who did the costuming for that. And I just recently spoke with the woman who did House of David. And those are both examples of like people doing massive amounts of historical research and then like dedicating themselves to getting it right. And they're also examples of teams of people coming together, armorers, people making shoes and dyeing things. People don't always understand that costuming is never one costume. You have to have a backup. You have to have one for the stand-in. You have to have one for the stunt person. And then maybe the shirt gets torn. And so for continuity, it's such a huge amount of organizing and structure. And to combine that with the craft, I feel like it can be art, absolutely.
And then my second prong to that question is a question that I usually ask every guest. And this is, this can be as nebulous or as specific as you want it to be. What is art to you? What does art mean?
Okay, so I've actually spent quite a bit of time thinking about this. To me, art is work that produces an involuntary emotional response. It doesn't have to be any particular format or medium, but when you make something, and regardless of wanting to, somebody else feels something, good or bad, I feel like that's art.
It's a lovely answer. Let's talk about the storytelling nature of fashion, because I think it's something that's often left out. Fashion is actually like a super art. In some ways, it touches so many different forms of art, whether it's film, whether it's music, whether it's dance, or whether it's the personalities that make visual art. Everybody knows Salvador Dali by how he looks before some of them even know his pieces,
I'm
right?
thinking the mustache.
The mustache and the suits, absolutely, the white Oxfords. What is this storytelling component that fashion has been able to occupy that makes it so powerful?
I think that this really goes back to, the height of Western culture. If you want to think about the centuries, like Britain and France are fighting with Spain, and they're basically in charge of most of the world. There was a really, really, really long time when the only way that clothing style changed was because somebody brought a doll to another, geographic, a court, right? You bring a little fashion doll, and then you can see how they're doing it, at someplace else. It took such a long time for that to happen, and then to hand make an entire dress, and then, I think the exclusivity is kind of, or the feeling of exclusivity that some people assign to being, on trend or whatever. I think that that's connected back to that royalty thing, which is problematic, absolutely. The exclusivity thing, it's diamonds aren't really that hard to find. It just depends on how you market them, And it's a similar kind of a thing. The diamond itself doesn't have to be unethical or, but it can be.
You really, you pressed my button when you talk about the exclusive nature of any art form. It's one of the things that I have spent, my life, whether it's through narrative or through direct action. The exclusive nature of art, I think, is always detrimental to art, but I do understand how it kind of undergirds a market for that art. But I also, because of that, see very small revolutions. And so the young lady or the young man shopping at a thrift store because they want to appear countercultural, right? Whether that's because they only paid a small amount for this, or whether it's because it's actually vintage. That in itself is a revolution because that butts against the system. But without that system, you couldn't have that small, beautiful act of revolution. And so they kind of dance with each other.
Oh, totally. And I do believe that it's easier to change something from the inside than the out. I think you know, not every single instance, and there's definitely places where that's not the case. But I think it's a lot easier to edit than it is to write. And I don't know, there's...
That was a perfect segue because you participate, and I do think that fashion is an art, and as you agree, but you participate in two art forms very prominently, not just fashion, but writing. Is the writing a skill that you've accumulated because of your love for fashion and the way you express it, or are these just two skills that you hold and you've learned to marry them?
I think before I loved anything else, I loved to read. My mother was a children's librarian when I was a kid. She's a professor now. She studies how people access and then verify information. But I used to think it was the coolest thing in the whole wide world to go to my mom's work. She used to work at the Beverly Hills Public Library. I grew up in Southern California, and just like hang out in the back of the stacks all day and just read everything. I mean, I still read everything, and I've done a lot of my own studies into not just stories, but like how stories are told. I'm very into Joseph Campbell. I'm very into Arne Thompson. I'm very into I don't know, the more we learn about cultures, the more I feel like we can see that we all basically want the same things. We want our kids to be safe. We want to have a full stomach. We don't have to worry about when rain comes. And I don't know, when you read as voraciously as I do, the writing part, while it can be exceptionally frustrating, it can also feel like painting. It can feel like, I don't know, that runner's high when you're just like, sometimes the words just come out exactly the way you want them to. And I'm big on precision of language. I try very hard. In my opinion, the root of all human suffering is bad communication. And I would like to not participate in that. And so I just think using the exact correct words is impossible, but it's very fun to try.
Well, you do it.
Thank
and
you.
even though it is very academic and astute, it does translate. Like I was reading some of your articles to prepare, and they were just excellent reads.
Thank
This
you.
is not about a discipline that I have been gung-ho interested in, but I can see your love for it, which makes the reader love it. And then it goes back to that connectivity that you were just talking about of human beings. I forget who says it, but they say life for everybody is just a pursuit of holding somebody's hand and walking home,
That's
right?
beautiful.
We're all just trying to make it home.
Yeah.
And you can tell in your writing that fashion is just one of the things that you use to make it home. And I think it's beautiful.
Well, thank you for saying that. That's lovely. I mean, I think for anybody who does any kind of creative work, it is so hard to see your own stuff with any kind of objectivity. But I don't know. I feel like it matters. I think that doing good work well, using our hands, I think it makes us better people. I think it makes us, I won't say empathetic because it's a buzzword, but I think it makes us more compassionate. And I think that the joy we get from making makes us more generous. And I want people to be happier and more generous with each other, with themselves. And I think that I try very hard to not take on work that is going to cause me to have to write like a hit piece. Like I have no desire to contribute to this white noise of negativity and anger. I would much rather say no thank you than write something mean or have to fake my way into writing about work that I don't legitimately like. And I mean, I've lost opportunities because, but I don't have a poker face. And I would rather just, like I said, the precision of language, living what I believe is really hard, but I try to do it. I mean, it matters. And I think you understand that.
I think it's the question that I asked you earlier, I think I had an answer to it, why fashion is such a huge storytelling tool, because there's nothing more honest than fashion. If you see a picture of your grandmother, what she's wearing is what she was wearing, right? And that is just as important to the story as anything else. In your last answer, you were talking about your own work. In closing, I want to ask you, do you have any ambitions for your work? Is there anything that you lay down at night and say, this is something I got to do before I check out?
I'm going to have a book. I'm going to hopefully have many books. But I would love to write Christian Lacroix's authorized biography. That would be quite a bit of joy for me. He's been very kind to me. I wrote a piece a few years ago about one of his muses who died, Marie Selznick. She died very tragically young, and he's been lovely. He's helped me with a few things. I would like to think that perhaps one day I can convince him that he should let me write about his life.
Well, I'm not sure about his life, but as far as yours is concerned, we appreciate having you in this community, in this world, in this planet. The work that you put out, I think, is just crucial. It's beautiful. It's lovely. It's art. Thank you so much for coming. And thank you all at home for joining us for another episode of The Warehouse, a Speaking Of show. See you next time.
Oh, thank you.